Okay, so you really want to know, huh? Fine. I'm gonna start by telling you this. And this is important, so listen up. Your entire life, this one and many others, you've been a god who uses its absolute power to make yourself powerless. Entire cultures, especially this one, have all been afraid of their weaknesses, supposedly. When in reality, they've all been afraid of their power. This goes beyond the matrix of reality. This is something much deeper than that. This is eternal. This is fully realizing your consciousness. This is infinite. This is evolution. This is our divine right.
All right, here we are once again recording for the podcast. I'm very excited. I got a great show for you guys today. Don't worry, I'm not drinking a beer. That's a water. It looks like one, but I am not out in the desert smoking Marlboros and channeling deities. But we are going to talk about a lot of that stuff. I am with someone who is out in the desert. She's not drinking Budweiser, but she is a psychic, an actor, a comedian. So I'm very excited to have on April Eckfield Carrasquillo. I know I butchered that, and I'm so sorry. April Readings is how she goes on social media. And I can't speak Spanish in Spanish, but thank you so much for being a guest on the podcast. I'm very excited to talk to you.
Thank you for having me. This is so exciting. This is really fun. And you did a great job. You could live in Spain.
Thank you so much. I was in Spain a couple of years ago, and I didn't do all that well. I have learned, different places. They definitely have nuanced ways of speaking and stuff like that. Lots of slang. That's the first thing that we tend to pick up when it comes down to it. But it is nice. I think it's a lovely name. It's very long, and it has two rolly R's, which is fun. And I think it's beautiful. So welcome. It's Puerto Rican. Is that true?
Well, it's actually a Spanish name from Spain, Madrid specifically, but it's my mother's maiden name. I am Puerto Rican culturally. I was raised in Los Angeles and Puerto Rico, and I took that name because nobody believes me on the West Coast. They don't hear this accent, and they're like, no, and then they think I'm white, and but I'm a white Hispanic, so I identify as Latina.
Okay, well, copy that. Well, I identify as a Latin woman in a lumberjack's body, so we're going to get along great. That is true. That is the truest way I could condense who I am into a small statement. And so I think we already have a lot of flow going, which is great, even just before the interview. And so I'm excited to get into this, and we kind of already have even delved into a bit of a topic. So we'll talk a little bit about, first of all, I want to talk about what you do, which seems like a lot. But earlier before the show, you were like, this all rolls together. I couldn't agree more. I think that's beautiful and brilliant. But on Instagram, if you want to find April, it's at April Readings. You don't have to type in Carrasquillo. Damn it. I'm not even going to try anymore. It's not worth it. But let's talk a little bit about that whole aspect, the idea of psychicness. We were talking about before how you're an actor, a psychic, and a comedian, and how much those things go together. For me, it took a while to connect the dots, but I couldn't agree with you more. Let's go ahead and start talking about that.
Yeah. I mean, I think the word that binds all of that, which is part of being human, is being intuitive and being interested in people and relationships and growing and falling down a lot. The falling down part is really, really important. But I had my first memorable, that I remember as an adult, psychic / paranormal experience when I was about 7, 8 years old. And it involved being visited by my uncle, who had just tragically taken his life. And my experience of being psychic was a very confusing, really painful path for many, many years, because I didn't know that I was any different than anybody else. And I knew things that I wasn't supposed to, and that I had no evidence to prove, and that other people didn't. And so it's a profound part of my experience as a person who has had opportunity to form myself, to make choices, and to develop myself. What do you do with all that stuff? Those first experiences, those, genesis of identity type things. And so for me, choosing what to say, what not to say, what to do with those pictures and thoughts and that information that's come to me, and learning how to turn it on and off if possible. All of that has been really instrumental and helpful for my growth, but I wouldn't say that it was easy. And so I do readings, and that's something that I've been doing for, at least a decade, but I definitely informally was doing it for years and not quite understanding why or what was going on, but it was happening. And as I think that's true for a lot of people in other talents in life, you have certain gifts, which if you refer to astrology, that speaks somewhat to the South Node, or if you look at karma, it can be, past lives. But we bring in certain gifts, and gifts sometimes require sacrifice. Like magic requires a sacrifice. You have to sort of learn how to work with it, which also falls in Jupiter as a planet associated with abundance and luck expansion, but you can have too much of a thing, or not have the full capacity to use it or direct it or steer it in a way that is beneficial. So I know I'm sort of mixing a lot of things in the pot, but I guess that's me. So I don't even know where we started, except to say that I am psychic. I'm a medium. If I had to categorize my gifts, I see pictures, I'm clairaudient, I can hear, sometimes I get a message in a voice. Sometimes I'm a word interested person. So sometimes the words will be magnified, like under a magnifying glass for me. I can, spirit comes through for me, and that usually is in the form of people's ancestors or somebody they know or who has known them. Less frequently is it something more abstract. Although I can do that. But yeah, so I'm a medium too. I can communicate with animals. And I also am trained as a coach. I've done a lot of coaching. And so to the point about doing a lot of things, intuition has always played a primary role in everything I do. When it's a psychic reading or when it's coaching, it gets to be in the foreground. It gets to be known as, gets to be seen and known explicitly, which is really fun and very powerful for me. I hope for the people that I work with. And because I've experienced the strife of psychic development and also the joy and the benefits of it, I like to also indirectly, at least, empower my clients to do the same with themselves, to ultimately learn to fish, learn to use and call in their intuition.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I love that. I would love to know a little bit about, your discovering of your gifts. I'm one of the ones who, like, I don't think I really knew I was onto something when I was younger and kind of creative, but really around 2012 is when my whole reality just went
really
bluey, and I had to rebuild everything. So that's kind of where I've been, so I'm not one that, like, I always had, gifts or something like that. So I think it would be interesting to sort of unpack your discovery and how you started to figure out how to apply these gifts.
Well, I don't know that I ever even had the question, frankly, because I was raised, my parents are interesting people who exposed me to great things. Like, my mother had built a meditation room in our house. My father was a Scientologist for a really long time. I personally am not a Scientologist, but I do have a nice long joke bit about it for my comedy stand-up. Awesome. And no judgment about that. But Yeah. So they were very interested in religion and esoterica. They both were very rebellious. And I came into the world in the midst of, that. And so I was exposed to a lot of different things. My father used to take me to channelings of Saint Germain. I was in sound healings. And I think kids today, probably that's sort of more of a normal thing, you could say. But, their generation was perhaps more out on the skinny branches in a way, relative to conservative culture that we live in. And so I was exposed to things. I had my first astrology reading when I was like 12. It was handwritten. The woman was like 88 years old and a pioneer in the astrological world. And I did not know how she could decode from that drawing what was going on with me, but she was right. And she was right for decades to come. Astrology and psychics, and I should be clear, I do practice astrology, but I don't claim the title astrologer. Because it's so deep and so technical, and there is certification, which I don't have at this point. But I do associate them because they are considered taboo, and so I think that one of the first formal experiences that introduced me to somebody practicing something like this that was interesting, compelling, and made a difference for me was my first astrology reading. The first sort of out of control paranormal type medium like experience was when I was 7-8 years old, and my uncle had just killed himself tragically. Nobody in my family was talking about it. Nobody told me that it happened. I knew it happened. I knew that it happened. I knew before it happened that it was something like that was going to happen. So a very unsurprising series of events occurred. And then I literally actually saw him in the street one day, and that's kind of a really long story, but that was real for me. And I couldn't talk to anybody about it until probably, I would say, like maybe 5 years ago. I was invited to do a storytelling event, and I told the story of what happened. So sometimes, we have to take the watch apart to know how to put it back together. And that's kind of what being psychic has been like for me, is looking back at my experience and realizing that the puzzle pieces were already there to help me understand, what's going on. But psychic readings, I started doing tarot cards and tarot readings earlier in life. I went to art school, and I used to do a lot of tarot card readings when I was in school for people. And I intentionally did them for people that I didn't know, or I would ask them to ask me questions about things that I didn't know anything about. So I was sort of to test what would come out of it. And it's a pretty profound experience because I tended to always be right. And that was really unsatisfying for me. So eventually I did do some psychic development classes. There are a lot of schools where you can sort of work on your energy or learn how to meditate and run energy, you learn about chakras, things like that. And mainly when I did and I was constantly hearing things or seeing things, and it was really disturbing to me. And so I primarily started doing psychic development work to learn how to make it stop. But I knew that I was psychic. I just had no interest in being one. I didn't know how much fun it could be. So in terms of like a formal process, meditation was the number one tool that helped me to turn something that felt like it was hindering me, or maybe it was like not in my control or really difficult, creating problems, to something that I could sort of turn on and off a little bit. And by meditation, I mean a very active, guided type of meditation that includes running energy, clearing chakras, clearing spaces, creating, using psychic protection, connecting to my higher self. There's, it's really important to be able to distinguish between what belongs to you and what belongs to the person you're reading for. So learning how to make separations is another thing. So yeah, I'm sorry if I'm like a little all over the place. Mercury is running amok in my brain today. But yeah, no, I mean, there's so many parts, and I would say that the first part at least. Did I say parf? I said parf. I should note that. Let's just stop for the parf. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think that it's not uncommon for people around their Saturn return, which is around 27 to 30, age 27 to 30, for the shit to hit the fan. And that's when you really become sort of an adult. But for anybody who has psychic impulses or curiosity or interest in these areas, that's usually when it has to come out. It's the beginning, even if it takes 7 or 8 years for that to really develop and take a real form. That's a big turning point. And that was a turning point for me. I had a younger brother who was tragically murdered. Almost like an echo of my uncle's suicide. I knew it was going to happen. And I spent at least a year trying to sort of save him, to save somebody who wasn't gone. And the way that story played out, which took a number of years, really cracked me open to, I have to do something with this. And, I always want to give clarity and structure and form to the formless, not because we don't need the formless. The formless needs to just be what it is, but because we live in the 3-dimensional world as well as the 5D world, right? We need to acknowledge that we have a body and we interact with people, and we need language and form. So when I talk about this, if you might even like detect that I'm trying to sort of like structure my words to convey, the what happened, because there's like 2 real worlds for me, and I think for everyone. And there's the real world, which includes something that's intangible, or a lot that's intangible that we can't touch or necessarily see. And then there's what maybe a large portion of the population, or you could say the majority, believes, which is this hard stuff, and this body. And so my experience, after my brother died, was profoundly that real world of the intangible. And I was having understanding about things, and the stakes were so high with his death. And there was it was a crime, and there was mystery surrounding it. And there was not a lot of really great clarity coming from institutions or police or investigators or anything. So I had to use that other world to help me to make sense of something that I had premonitions about, and that even after it physically actually happened, there was no clarity about. So I and this is something I experience with a lot of people in client work. People call me when they have a question that nobody's answering, or that the question isn't being taken seriously, or the institutions or the powers that be or whatever is available to them is not doing the job. Mm-hmm. So I like to think of psychic readings as, if you take away like all of the baggage that comes with the word psychic, and you just sit down with somebody who's open, mm-hmm. and who has a little bit of experience with that, or maybe a lot, and can really deeply listen to what it is that you're saying, and maybe even listen beyond the words you're saying and see what you're seeing, or feel what you're feeling, and see it from another perspective. That's what I think I do, is I connect with your higher self. Your higher self gives me pictures, and then we have a conversation.
That's cool. That makes a lot of sense. I think it's really interesting too, how it does all relate, especially to this like creative sort of world, because that is that other world you're talking about. And I love the idea that you can and try to, bring something in that's relatable and understandable. Like, I love that too. I would say that my Saturn return, that was definitely the time where, when I hit 30 was 2012. So that was kind of the same. Yeah.
I want to be respectful of people's age, because I don't want them to feel called out about, people are weird about that, but yeah.
Yeah, no, but it was my experience, yes, that was a very much a rebuilding year, very, very much. And since then I've tried to do similarly, where I'm taking like sort of concept, like I will call myself a blue collar mystic, right? Like I'm trying to take this sort of woo woo concept and then just bring it into, like I grew up in West Georgia, right? Where like people are like, yeah, man, they are, more simple minded and more traditional. So to be able to break that wall of tradition, especially like Christianity and stuff like that, because if you don't phrase it right, people will be like, well, that's the devil, and then immediately sort of jump to that. Like if it doesn't fit into my box, it is the devil. Anything in here is fine. Everything else is the devil. So I've had to learn, but I love that. I love that you think of it like that. And I think it's interesting too, because when we do, something like a fine art, like, or acting or comedy, that's what we're doing too, in a sense, right? Like expressing what can't really be put into words in a way.
Yes, giving form to the formless.
Form to the formless. Yeah, that's beautiful. I love that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's in a way, I mean, why do we make art? Why do we form sentences? what are we doing here? Which gets into the big questions, but we're learning, and we are connecting, and we are learning a lot about love. I really think that's, the beginning and the ending of it all, really. But like for me, acting is freedom. Acting is the opportunity to play. So rather than look at and have a psychic conversation with somebody's dead uncle, I could be the dead uncle.
Yeah.
I can play the villain. I can play the shadow of life, which is so vivid in balancing who we are, I mean, especially in the era of like social media and self-invention through social media, how people sort of portray themselves and avatars and everything. Like there's just something so valuable in being willing to go into that depth and that darkness, and also comedy. Comedy is like just telling the truth in a we all temporary, perhaps conditional agreement that we're going to laugh at ourselves. We're willing to make fun of ourselves. We're willing to laugh at our hypocrisy and our contradictions. And I actually think that's really healing. Laughter is really good for spirituality. It's great medicine.
I couldn't agree more. Yeah.
There are lots of people who would never get a reading who would go to a comedy show. And can get the similar benefit.
I love that. That's great. Yeah. I wanted to talk about this. This is a great sort of topic because, when I first started doing comedy, especially, I had really compartmentalized the two worlds where it's like, oh, comedy is what's wrong with the world. Comedy is, what is off and what should be improved or could be better and is, wrong, for lack of a better way to say it. And then spirituality is I have to tell myself everything's okay, even when I feel like it's not. So for me, coming into that place, that was kind of my attitude about it, even though, I knew it's all is one, but I couldn't figure out how to sort of bring those worlds together for quite some time, because one is about picking things apart. And then the other is really about seeing everything as a whole, if I was looking at it like that. But I would love to talk a little bit about that, because I've definitely seen, I have a different take now, but I think it's an interesting thing to think about. Like, how can we take something like comedy, which appears to be pointing out, the things that are funny or different or odd about the world, and then bring that in without, in a healthy way, I guess, or how those two things can go together. As opposed to it is the juxtaposition where the art is and where the laughter is. So I don't know. I would love to talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, coming from acting, which is my primary, the thing that I've done for longer, one of the main differences is you're looking back at the audience and they let you know how things are going real time. And sometimes it doesn't go well. And all comedians know, as you know, you got to bomb before you're going to, slay. So, and bombing and slaying is simply a matter of connection. It's a matter of being in the listening and having a group of people be in the listening with you. So it's a really, for me, it's an incredibly rewarding experience, regardless of failing or succeeding, to first open up my throat chakra and speak what for me feels playful and fun and truthful. And yes, to your point about critique or, that sort of nitpicking or breaking, I guess identifying the things that are not working or that are hypocritical or don't make sense in our culture. That's a type of comedy. I mean, certainly observational comedy, which is so fun. With all respect to Norm Macdonald, who's one of the greatest, just passed. We're all very, very devastated by his passing. He's so brilliant. I think even if you didn't know him personally, you feel the loss of this voice that kept a torch burning for some piece of you that was needed to be acknowledged or needed to be expressed. And those who can express are doing a service for those who cannot or who do not, but yeah, it's interesting. My point of entry into comedy is I've always been obsessed, just as obsessed as I have been in all of the esoteric things. I, grew up watching Richard Pryor and George Carlin and, SNL as a young kid, Gilda Radner, all the great comedians, Jane Curtin, Gene Wilder. I'm obsessed with comedy. Also Bill Cosby. I mean, let's be real, this is another era and he is who he is and what he's done is horrible, but he was funny, and I gave my dad a book called, I think it was called Dad, written by Bill Cosby for Father's Day, which I'll never forget now because I'm like, whoa, that was weird. But anyway, yeah. So yeah, but so I finally, well, how can I simplify this so I don't overtalk it? So about 4 or 5 years ago, I started doing some stand-up comedy classes. I was told for years that I was good at writing jokes, and I had no idea that I was writing jokes. I didn't know what a joke was. I thought a joke was something other people did. I didn't realize it was peppered throughout my writing because I do write. And I was in a relationship with somebody who had done a lot of stand-up, and he's a very funny person. And he was like, you got to get up and do this. And I was getting old. So I was like, I better fucking do this now. So, and it is true that like, you get funnier, you potentially get much funnier as you get older with more experience. So I didn't feel like I was too old. So I started doing stand-up. And then I started hosting a show once a month and, here in Los Angeles on the Sunset Strip. And it was pretty successful. And I started bringing in comedians who were writers for Conan and, really, really great seasoned comedians. Always had more women on the program than men, just to sort of balance things out. Always represented diverse groups and genders and gender identification, all of that. And it was so much fun. But I was really interested in, can it be funny if it's not cynical? Can it be funny if it's not negative or destructive? Mm-hmm. And as you may have experienced when you first start out, especially, you've got to do open mic after open mic. And most of those rooms are populated with young, unhappy men who unfortunately don't have a lot of experience, or at least don't have a great deal of perspective yet. They'll get it. And so that was a bit hard. So I kind of gravitated towards a trend that was growing, which was all female comics, female mics, or mics that were, LGBTQ friendly. And I started hearing people talk that were really interesting. And that was part of how I formed the idea for this show was called Art Damage it's just on pause because of the pandemic. I wanted to bring together people with different voices and perspectives. I didn't want to hear the same jokes about, dating on the internet from every single comedian of the same age. I was like, stop a little bit,
totally,
and it was really fun. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different types of comedy too, not everybody does stand up, right? And even good stand-ups sometimes really thrive when they break out from that particular form and whether they do movies or they do improv sketches or, a podcast, it lends itself to different forms. But for me, writing jokes, learning to write jokes well, understanding the form, keeping it short, set up, punchline, space for the audience to discover something, has been incredibly rewarding. Hard to tell in this podcast because I'm talking so much and not, keeping it short, but I'm working on it. And I think keeping things short is.
Yeah. But that's what this podcast is for. So don't feel self-conscious at all. I'm interviewing you. and I want to know. So I'm asking the questions. So, and I think that's an excellent take, pretty comprehensive too. Thinking about, you were saying like, talking about things that can be funny, like whether they're sort of inclusive or exclusive, maybe like where it's like, you don't necessarily have to be harmful or damaging to be funny. It's easier. It's almost like when you're talking about like, oh yeah, it's the same, 25-year-old dude that's going to talk about the internet dating or whatever. It's almost like, well, if you're just it's almost like there's low hanging fruit and then there's things that are just different. And I tend to gravitate towards something different. Of course, you're young, and I remember reading Judy Carter's book, and she's like, I didn't feel like I wrote a good joke for the first 3 years of writing. And I totally get that. Totally get that. Because you start out and you're like intentionally trying to do it. Because like when I was growing up, my friends were always funny. We were always BSing and just, telling each other jokes. And I'm surround myself with funny people, but I didn't even realize that stand-ups, because I watched, like you, Richard Pryor, Eddie Murphy, and so many when I was growing up, that I thought they're so funny. They just go out there, they're so funny, and they just do it. I didn't think they wrote jokes. I had no idea. Which means they're really doing. And I think probably Richard Pryor and Eddie and those guys, they had some improvisational room and did some things that were, off the cuff. But, my friend James, same kind of thing with him. He saw George Carlin 2 nights in a row and he was just pissed the second night because it was the exact same show. And so until yeah, he's like,
pick it up on the fly.
Yeah, exactly. And those routines are so elaborate of his. I don't know how I missed it, because I was always a big fan of him and Mitch Hedberg, and then you watch Mitch Hedberg. Oh my God, yeah. But then you watch Mitch Hedberg's special edited, and then you watch it by itself, and you see, even though he's brilliant and clearly a unique and special comedian, the audience, it takes them 15-20 minutes to catch up to what he's doing, even in that special. But the way they edited it, it seemed a little bit, and I didn't know that was a thing either, right? And so I actually, a friend of mine who is an LA comic there, Jason Webb, he was the first person that kind of put it into my mind. He was here performing, and he just murdered for an hour on stage, and just was so good. And then he came off stage and he was just this regular guy that just was talking, and I was like, wait a second, is this the same person? And then the next day we're talking, we do a podcast, and he starts talking about writing, and some light bulb just went off in my head that I was like, oh, you can write jokes. And that's when I started to do stand-up myself, because I had no idea. I didn't even know that was possible. But when you're talking about having a conversation and being in the same space as the audience, like, I think that's beautiful too, because there's an element of, I don't know, just like you said, you're having a conversation and everyone's in there for the conversation. And there's something that you can't write necessarily for that, like to have that kind of, to open up that sort of emotional space in a venue. I imagine having intuitive gifts, and I think we're all obviously intuitive. Some people are more in touch than others, but maybe some of those intuitive gifts might be able to give a little bit of leverage as far as like connecting emotionally with the audience.
Well, you sure hope so. Yeah, I mean, I had said that one of the main differences between acting and comedy is you're acting, you have a script, or you're improvising too, but you're being private in front of an audience or a camera, and you do have to sort of have this fourth wall, this idea that we suspend reality in the interests of the story, and so people lean in, the audience is dark, and the story happens, especially if you're on camera, you're ignoring a crew on a set. But you're not ignoring them. It's a practice, like anything that you do well. So I don't want to imply that acting is pretending, because ironically, I really don't think it is. Not the best, not the great stuff. But that was the most striking thing for me. Like, I started out, before I did stand-up, I did the Moth storytelling slams in New York City and in LA. And that was terrifying. I bombed every time. It was horrible. I told great stories horribly because I didn't really know how to deal with, as an actor, that there was these people were looking back at me, judging. Yeah. And so what I found a lot more fun in a way at that time about stand-up, once I started, is you could play. You could, you have pauses. You need to pause. You have to give it ideas or jokes come out, and you've got to give people room to breathe, but their brains are part of the soup, that makes it a great night. Something that I learned from one of my stand-up teachers, the great Lisa Sunstead. I don't know if you know who she is. She has a company called Pretty Funny Women, which is not what it sounds like. When she's been doing comedy forever. She's so great. And she was told that she was too pretty to be funny. So she started, and she worked with people like Tig Notaro, and she's working with all the great female comedians and stand-ups and improvisers. And so she started this company sort of ironically, as if to say, women, the whole history of like people saying that women are not funny, which is just, it's not true. But she teaches that you're writing when you're standing up, you're writing when you're talking. And this is why you record your set, you transcribe it, you have to record it. You've got to hear what's going on, because you've got to hear the audience and you've got to hear your pauses. So it's not even the words. It's the things between the words. It's what's happening in the room that you can't quite capture if it was just all on paper, in which case we would just publish it and it'd be a book, right? We wouldn't need the stand-up show. Right. But I really think that it's for the audience, and it's humbling, as it's, and that connects it for me to psychic work. Very humbling. I mean, to have the audacity to sit down with a stranger and talk about really intimate things, and dreams and visions and tragedies and history and the future and all of that. You've got to be willing to sort of get out of the way and be willing to, you got to be willing to fail. Cause I don't think you can can do anything bold in this world without being willing to fail. So I don't know. I mean, we could talk about this forever, but there are a lot of things that they have in common. I think one of the main differences with stand-up is that you have an agreement. It's in public. It's a group experience, and it only ever happens once, which is maybe that binds it to acting. Like for stage acting is, when you see a play, it may be the same play the second night, but it's not the same play. It's not the same night. It's not the same, because it's not the same audience or breath. Right. If breath is life, is a measure of life, then
that's really good. I like that. I like to think about too how it would fold into acting too, and how intuitive gifts and being a psychic and talking about that freedom too, and how that must sort of roll in, because it seems like you could probably explore territory, and with that same sentiment of, hey, I'm going to explore this territory, maybe I fail. but the freedom to sort of move about in that world and what that might sort of add to your ability.
Do you mean what intuition would add to the ability, or what acting would add to my, am I understanding you?
You are, absolutely. So I'm actually interested in both now that you say it that way, because I was thinking, acting into it, but let's do both.
I think with acting, the first thing that comes to mind when it's like good, juicy, fun, awesome, great role, great writing, whatever, is that you number one, you get to play. Number two, you have to give up all of your assumptions, your negative assumptions about, and for some reason I keep thinking of villains because we love to watch them. We love to project our righteous hate or whatever emotions onto them, but somebody's playing that role, and that person didn't murder anybody. That's an actor. So what are they doing? What's going on in their brain? There's extraordinary compassion and empathy for others to the point of being willing to embody it. And, which another tangent that we could go off on is all the things that have happened to these extraordinary actors who have self-destructed. Philip Seymour Hoffman, who I had the blessing of getting to know a little bit. Heath Ledger. Just so many over time. And there's something energetic going on there in that person's life and with their gifts as well. But I think that being an actor is a physical, actual practice that requires courage for me to be private in public, for me to step into the world of another, whether it's a fictional character or a real autobiographical character, and walk in their shoes, confront their obstacles. Because with acting, you don't have a story without an obstacle. There is nothing to write about until you confront an obstacle, because obstacles help us to reveal character. It has a lot to do with empathy. It has a lot to do with relationship, which is another interest of mine. My parents divorced when I was born, basically, and they've gone on to marry other people several times. And they're both thankfully happily married. 2 Canadians, probably has something to do with it. Right. Very, very kind people. That's the solution, guys. Just marry a Canadian. All your love woes. I just experienced so much strife in around me in my early life. Perhaps that has something to do with why I'm so interested in relationships, and not just romantic relationships, but of all kinds. And also the challenge of being who you are, which is everybody's job, really. It's just be who you are, which sounds like a riddle or a koan. Like, okay, get out of your own way. Just be yourself. Like,
you don't know what you don't know, like all these cliches.
Strangely more easily said than done, right? And so I think that's what I love also about acting, and how it sort of helps is, it's one thing, it's kind of like being in the bleachers versus being on the court in a game. If you use sports as an example, you can talk about the game, you can cheer somebody on, you can have a lot of opinions, but your opinion doesn't make the elevator go up or down. It doesn't make the game go. What makes the game go is the players on the court who are training, who are working with each other, who are restraining themselves, who are focusing and directing their energy, which is their primary gift, right? They have energy. That I think is very connected. It's getting on the court and doing something about what you're thinking about, or putting yourself in the shoes of the person that you're critical of, or who you love and admire. Play a hero. Everyone wants to do that, but you got to be a hero to play a hero. So you've got to be the hero in your own life, to really be able to play one. So somehow in my own abstract brain, this all makes a lot of sense. And I have an enormous appetite and capacity for seeing that in other people. I can see the depths and I can see the light.
That's really
gravitate towards the light, and hopefully help others to find it or to express it. But we have to acknowledge our depths in character. or even the dark, not great stuff, and how we get in our own way ultimately so that we can do that thing, which is called being yourself, which is supposedly easy, but easier said than done.
Oh, it's so good. Yeah. Tim and Noske, that's the whole spiritual quest right there. They walk right past the Oracle of Delphi that says Tim and Noske right into the church, whipping out their wallet and throwing it in the plate. Yep. And I totally can relate to the difficulty of that process myself too, because I searched high and low, trying to figure out like what was my reason and all these types of things. It's so funny because I think sometimes things are so close to us that we just overlook, you know. But I think that you probably have a bit of a gift, it sounds like it, to help people kind of begin to explore that and see their own light. So maybe we could talk a little bit about what your process is like when when somebody is like, hey, you know what, April, I would love a reading. I would love to talk to you. I would love to know kind of how that would go.
Yeah. So, well, the number one thing is that I meditate every day. I have all kinds of rituals in my life. I mean, you're seeing me today. Your listeners are not seeing me, but I look like a normal lady just who might walk into the grocery store. You wouldn't think I was a psychic, but in my practices, which I'm deeply invested in, I am always cultivating a high vibration. So literally that is part of my diet, my sleep, the conversations that I have, the ones I walk away from, the books I read, the shows I watch, and the people I surround myself with. It's super important for me to maintain a high vibration, meaning eliminating obstacles to connect with spirit. So, I love a good glass of wine. I love a beer, but I can't really indulge too much. I'm way too sensitive and it bogs me down and it clouds my brain, which is one of the sensory tools that I lean on for this work. Exercise, if you move your blood, you move oxygen, you move your energy, you raise your vibration. We all feel it. We all know it because we feel great when we do it. Right. So there's a lot of like boring stuff that like your mom might have taught you or your trainer or your coach to do. And that actually really does contribute to a higher spiritual state. And then there's a lot of other things, but the main thing is I will always meditate before a reading. People can book with me online. That part's easy. It's aprilreadings.com. You can find me through Instagram or the internet. And then I call you. And we sit down and we start by taking a long, deep breath. If you've ever practiced Kundalini, the breath is considered sort of like the clutch for your energy. So it's a really nice way to sort of reset, because we're all busy, like you and I today. We come into our events and our conversations carrying a lot of stuff from what came before it. Yeah. And we want to, the more you clear space, psychic space, the more space there is for something to illuminate or show up for you. So we do that. We sort of set the stage, and I do that in my preparation and my meditation. And then I like to take a general look at what your psychic temperature is. So it's kind of like checking your inbox, your email inbox. Is there anything there? Is there a message? And I like to start in a neutral place before we start steering the river with questions, because even before you get an answer to a question, if there is an answer, your question is directive, formative. It has an influence like that. So we start in a general place, which I think is really great for people because they're like, who is this lady? Is she legit? Is this just going to be a weird?
That's going to be the first thing off the rip, right? Like, dealing with the skepticism.
Also, you might not ask a question that's really important. There may be some message for you that you need to know about, or that would be beneficial. I shouldn't say need, but that you would want to know about. And that's a great opportunity for it to just show up right there in the foreground. And whether or not you want to talk about it is I respect that. So, people are allowed to say anything they want. It's a safe space. They can say as much or as little as they want. They can just buy the ticket, take the ride, but I tend to attract people who are very engaged and actively interested in all of it. So we have great, really fun conversations, but yeah, so we start in a general place, and I'll see a picture first. Often it's abstract, and then it's almost like the pages of a book are turning, and I just have to keep up. So I always invite people to interrupt me or stop me which I should have said to you earlier.
No.
Not the particular reading, but you know what I mean?
Right.
Because it just keeps going, and but it's so much fun. So then we usually move into questions, and people can ask questions that are as specific or general as they want. Sometimes I get people who have never had a reading before, and they're like, I don't know what to say. And I'm like, that's totally okay. Because when we start in that general place, we start moving in a direction. We start to see something, and so yeah. But I've had some really interesting conversations over the years. I mean, I've read for thousands of people. There's really no limit to what can happen, and that's fun. Yeah. And then it's sort of from that, usually from the initial reading, it becomes intuitive coaching, or, some people like to have a reading once a year for their birthday or once every 6 months. And some people are like, I want to talk to you, or I kind of leave it to them. I don't have like packages or anything at this time, but I let people be their own leader and initiate and trust themselves when the timing is right. And that's really important to me to lean into that. It's also easier for me.
Yeah, there you
Because
go.
as you know, schedule is a real challenge. But yeah.
Oh, you still there? You're frozen. Okay. I see you now.
Are we back?
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, we froze for a second, but yeah, apologies. Yeah. Well, the scheduling thing, and maybe I can send a resource or two that may help, because I promise you, I'm not the most put together. I do my best, right? Like I'm the only one back here right now. I'm hoping to have some help soon, but it is a challenge, and I completely understand that as well. But yeah, I'm excited. I'm really glad we had the opportunity to chat and connect. And I know for a fact from a friend of mine, that's why we're talking, that she was so impressed with you that she was like, you've got to connect with April. You've got to do it. And so, and she's done this twice and she's never been wrong. I completely, I would be like, okay, great. So so it took us a minute to get together, but I mean, there's no worries there. That's part of life and just being busy. And I just wanted to reach out, and I really, of course, have enjoyed this conversation, and just want to let people know where they can find you. I'll be sure to put links in the show notes, aprilreadings.com, as well as on Instagram. And if there's anything else that you would like to share with folks, or places that I may have missed, please feel free to do so.
I want to say thank you so much, and thanks for what you're doing. I listened to your intro as we started today, and I loved it. It's such a good mantra. We should all be listening to that when we wake up in the mornings. I really look forward to conversations with you, and I hope we do, because a lot of obviously this wonderful friend that lots of love to her too for making that happen. And to your audience, I applaud anybody who is taking the time to listen. Listening is the gateway to everything. You don't have to be a psychic to know a lot more than you do about what's going on. And listening is one of the first steps. So I'm honored, I'm humbled, and I'm grateful. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, likewise. Thank you so much, April. And we'll see you soon. We'll do this again.
I would love that.
Awesome.
Okay.